Picture a king so terrified of losing his throne that he swallowed his own children, one by one alive the moment each was born. This is the story of the cruelest thing any father in myth ever did to escape a prophecy, and of how, in the end, it failed. When we last left the cosmos, a younger god had reaped his own father with a sickle and seized the throne of all things. His name was Cronus, king of the Titans, the second ruler the universe had ever known, crowned in cold marble and gold. But on the very night he took the throne, his maimed father, the sky, pronounced a bitter curse upon him. Uranus swore that Cronus too would one day be overthrown, not by a brother, but by his own child. The same crime he had committed would be turned back upon him. The wheel of succession had begun to turn again. And Gaia, the deep earth herself, confirmed the prophecy. A son of Cronus was fated to cast him down. Most kings hearing such a thing would have despaired or denied it, or simply prayed that it might never come. Cronus did none of these. Cronus decided coldly that he would make certain no such child ever lived to grow. He took his own sister, the gentle Titaness Rhea, as his queen, and as the mother of his children. She was radiant and loving, and she did not yet know the monstrous thing taking shape in her husband's mind. For in the cold, calculating heart of the king, a solution to the prophecy had already taken shape, complete and merciless and final. If a child of his was destined to destroy him, then he would simply let no child of his survive. Not by exposure on a hillside, not by the blade, but by something darker, more certain, and far more intimate. He would take each newborn the very moment it drew its first breath, and he would swallow it whole. And so, in the fullness of time, the first child came, a bright and tiny daughter, the goddess Hestia. Rhea held her firstborn for a single trembling moment, and the whole cruel cosmos seemed to soften into gold. Then the king came near and reached out his great hands and gently asked to hold his daughter. And Rhea, suspecting nothing, smiling through her tears of joy, placed the newborn goddess into her husband's arms. Cronus looked down at the tiny glowing child in his hands, his own blood, his own firstborn daughter. And he felt nothing for her at all, only the cold and constant weight of the prophecy on his mind. Slowly, he raised the infant toward his face, and across the hall, Rhea's joyful smile began to falter. Something was terribly wrong, in the way he held her, in the hunger, not the love, filling his eyes. "Husband," she whispered, a cold dread rising in her. "What are you doing?" But the king did not answer her. And then, before his wife's horrified eyes, Cronus opened his mouth and swallowed their newborn daughter whole. Rhea's scream tore through the marble halls of the cosmos, a sound of grief no world had ever heard. But it was already done. The firstborn goddess was gone, sealed away in the lightless dark inside the king. And here is the strange and singular horror that sets this myth apart from every other tale of a murdered child ever told. Hestia did not die. She could not die. She was an immortal goddess, wholly and eternally beyond the reach of death itself. She was simply swallowed whole, and living and fully aware, sealed away inside her own father's body, alive forever. It was not a meal. It was a prison, a living tomb of warm flesh with no door and no light. This was no gentle metaphor for time devouring all things, as far later ages would comfortably pretend. This was a terrified king burying his own living child in the dark to keep a stolen crown on his head. Rhea sank to the cold floor of the great hall, shaking, staring at a husband she no longer recognized. And Cronus, the cannibal king, felt the weight settle within him, then simply turned and walked back to his throne. One child down, He told himself the prophecy was already weaker. He told himself again that he was safe. He was wrong. But it would be a long and terrible age before the king ever learned how wrong he was. Because Cronus did not stop at one. He could not. The prophecy had named no single particular child. So every child that Rhea bore to him, the king had coldly resolved would meet that very same fate. In time, a second daughter came, Demeter, who was destined one day to green the whole living earth. The king took her from Rhea's arms before the broken mother could even speak her newborn daughter's name. And Demeter too vanished down into the living dark to lie beside her sister in the silence. That was two. Then came a third child, Hera, proud and radiant even as an infant, a queen already in the making. This time Rhea begged. She pleaded. She tried to hide the baby, pressing her close against her breast. But the king was far stronger and utterly without mercy, and Hera was torn away and swallowed too. That was three. Then came a son, Hades, dark-eyed and strangely silent, the future lord of all unseen things. He went down into the dark of his father's belly without so much as a single cry. That was four. And then a fifth, Poseidon, the child who would one day learn to shake both the sea and the solid land. The king seized him and swallowed him as well. Five immortal children, sealed alive in the endless dark. Imagine it, if you can, inside the body of the king of the cosmos, 5 living gods, fully awake. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, an entire generation of gods entombed together in their own father's living flesh. They could not die, and they could not escape, and they could do nothing at all but wait awake in the endless black. And outside, in the cold halls above, their mother grieved as no mother in all of creation ever had. 5 times she had carried a child within her. 5 times she had given birth in trembling hope. And 5 times she had been made to watch her own husband lift that child and swallow it whole. Rhea was hollowed out, emptied of everything, a queen of the whole cosmos, without one living child to hold. And the king, with every child he devoured, Cronus grew calmer, certain the prophecy was fading away to nothing. He truly believed that he was winning, that he could simply eat his way free of his own fate. And that belief, that towering arrogance, was the very thing that would in the end destroy him utterly. For when Rhea found herself carrying a 6th child, something deep inside the grieving mother finally broke. But it did not break into despair. It hardened into resolve, cold and clear and absolutely unbreakable. This child, this one last child, she swore upon the earth and sky that the king would never touch. But gentle Rhea was not strong enough to defy the king alone. So she turned to the only powers who were in secret. In the dead silence of the night, she fled to her own mother and father, Gaia and Uranus. To Gaia, the deep and patient earth, the grandmother of the gods, who had already brought one tyrant crashing down. And to Uranus, the wounded and distant sky, whose own bitter curse had set all of this in motion. She knelt before the ancient powers and begged them, "Help me save this one last child from his own father." And the 2 ancient powers who had been waiting for precisely this moment did not hesitate to agree. For Gaia had never once forgiven her son Cronus for leaving her monstrous children chained in the dark below. The earth herself wanted the cannibal king brought down every bit as much as the grieving mother did. So together, mother and grandmother and sky, they devised a plan to hide a god from the king of the cosmos. When Rhea's time at last drew near, they sent her far away across the dark sea to the island of Crete, to Lictus, a green and secret land as far as could be from the cold marble halls of the throne. And there, Hidden deep in the earth, in a cave upon a wooded mountainside, Rhea gave birth in secret. A son, golden and fearless, and blazing with a strength she had never once felt in any of the others. She named him Zeus, and holding him close in the dark, she knew, beyond any doubt, that this was the one. This was the child the prophecy had promised. This was the doom of the king, newly and quietly born. But it was not nearly enough simply to hide him. The king was still expecting a sixth child to be born. If Rhea returned to the throne with empty arms, Cronus would know in an instant that he had been betrayed. He would hunt the missing child to the very ends of the earth, and sooner or later he would find him. So Gaia took the newborn Zeus and carried him away into her own deep keeping, to be hidden and raised. And Rhea was left to do the hardest and the cleverest thing of her whole long and sorrowful life. She found a great stone, a heavy, ordinary rock, almost exactly the size and weight of a newborn god. And she wrapped it, with slow and infinite trembling care, around and around in soft white swaddling cloth. Round and round she wound the cloth, until the cold stone looked for all the world like a sleeping child. Then she gathered every scrap of courage she possessed and carried the swaddled bundle back to the halls of the king. Her heart must have been a storm of terror. One curious glance beneath that cloth, and absolutely all was lost. She came before Cronus and held out the swaddled bundle to him, exactly as she had 5 times before. "Here is your 6th child," she said softly, and she waited, and the whole watching cosmos held its breath. And here at last, the king's own cruelty betrayed him. He did not look. He did not pause to wonder. He was so used to devouring, so utterly sure of himself, that he simply reached out and took the bundle. And Cronus swallowed the stone whole, a heavy rock, dressed up as his son, and never felt a thing amiss. He felt the familiar weight go down inside him, and he was certain, his last great threat extinguished. The king of all the cosmos had just been completely outwitted by a grieving mother and an ordinary rock. And he had not the faintest idea what he had truly swallowed. He turned back to his throne, certain at last that he was finally safe. But far away, on the green island of Crete, the very truth the king had tried to swallow was growing stronger. In a hidden cave upon a wooded mountainside, the infant Zeus was alive and safe and thriving in secret. A wondrous she-goat named Amaltheia gave the hidden child her milk, rich and warm and humming with divine strength. And gentle mountain nymphs cradled him and rocked him and watched over him tirelessly, day and night, the secret golden child of the cosmos. But every baby cries, and a single thin cry carried on the wind could betray the whole desperate secret. So fierce young warriors called the Kouretes were set to stand guard at the very mouth of the cave. And whenever the infant god began to wail, they leapt at once into a wild and thundering armored dance. They clashed their bronze spears hard upon their bronze shields, again and again, raising a fierce and ringing and ceaseless metal clamor, loud enough to drown out every cry, so that the king upon his far throne would never once hear his son. And so the doom of Cronus grew up safe, nourished on divine milk and hidden behind a wall of dancing thunder. Think on what the cannibal king had truly done. He had eaten 5 children in a stone to cheat his fate. And by that very horror, he had created the one enemy he feared, and given a mother every reason to hide him. For every tyrant who tries to devour the future only ends up feeding it, and the wheel of succession turns. And one day the golden child in the cave will come home to free his swallowed kin and finish what was begun. Thank you for watching. If this tale stayed with you, Subscribe. A new myth arrives every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Until then, may the old stories keep their hold on you.